Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Elizabeth Carwell is my name. I'm the Communications Manager with Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and you're all very welcome to the first in our 2021 webinar series, Unlocking Knowledge Transfer. As some of you may know, we began this midway through last year, and we've had some really terrific feedback from everybody. So I'm very pleased to be letting you know that we will be running these webinars throughout 2021, so there'll be more from us as we go through the year. In terms of this morning, very pleased to be focusing on a really hot topic and something that a lot of people have come to us asking us about, and that's the area of intellectual property strategy development, and how intellectual property can feed into the overall development of an organisation. So this morning we're joined by two terrific speakers. We'll hear from them now shortly. Joe Doyle is Intellectual Property Manager with Enterprise Ireland, and Joe's going to share with us some insights and some advice really on how an intellectual property strategy can form part of an overall business development strategy, and how that can in turn feed into sort of the overarching corporate objectives. And Jenny Roper, who is the Director of Intellectual Property with Precisionbiotics, will share some thoughts with us then, and some of her experience. So Precisionbiotics is a Cork-based company. They specialise in the production of probiotics, and recently were acquired by a global Danish-based company, Novozymes. So Jenny's going to share her story and talk a little bit about how intellectual property has fed into the development of Precisionbiotics. Just before we hand over to Joe, a couple of short housekeeping notes. We are recording the webinar this morning, and that's really, we're going to circulate it afterwards. So if anybody does have any connectivity issues, or your sound drops for any particular reason, don't panic. We'll be circulating the full webinar with you after this morning. Second of all, we will have time for questions at the end of the session. So once we've heard from both our speakers, we'll be opening it to you to ask questions, and I really encourage that you take that opportunity to tap into the expertise that we have and the wealth of knowledge we have in Joe and Jenny. You'll see there's a questions box there to the right of your screen, so please tap in your questions as we go, and indeed you can hold them back until we have our question sessions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Joe, who's going to talk through some of the key things we need to consider if we're looking at developing an IP strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning, everybody. Hope you're all keeping well out there. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm the IP manager in Enterprise Ireland. So my job is to work with companies around their IP strategies. And what I'm going to do, so I'm just going to show my screen here. I hope that's coming across okay. And I'll turn off my camera so I'm not distracting myself. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk fairly briefly about what IP strategy is. I'm going to give a very top level introduction to what IP strategy means. I'm going to give a couple of frameworks maybe to help you get started in developing your IP strategy, and finally I'm going to touch on what Enterprise Ireland is doing in this area. So first of all, I want to thank KTI for setting this up, and I want to thank all of you for coming and joining. I think it's a great topic for the beginning of the year, and I hope that what you hear after this is going to maybe inspire you to add IP strategy to your list of New Year's resolutions. So to get stuck into that, sorry, no, my slides are not Okay, so why IP strategy? Well, we're living in a particular stage in time, and corporate value has changed a lot in very recent years. This slide here shows that there has been a total shift toward intangible value in companies. I won't get into the slide in great detail, but what you can see here is that the rise in intangible value in companies has really rocketed in the past number of years, to the point now where most companies' intangible value far outweighs the tangible value. The sort of things that would appear in the balance sheet are no longer the drivers of value. Also, due to trends like digitalization and the development of the knowledge economy and so on, the sort of companies that are leading are all digital companies, intangible companies. These are companies that don't own tangible assets anymore. So we're in this world. This is where businesses are operating at the moment, and this is why we need to have a means to capture that intangible value. So what does that mean for you as a business person? And the way I think about it is a bit like this. It's a bit like an iceberg. There's a lot of the value of your business that's under the waterline. It's invisible, it's intangible, it's stuff that you can't touch. And then there's a smaller proportion over the waterline that appears in your balance sheet. So that's a challenge for companies to manage. When you're at an early stage, it's maybe manageable, and there's a relatively kind of small portion under the waterline, but still a high proportion of the value of the company. But as companies scale, what the amount of value that's in that invisible, intangible part increases. And there are certain risks associated with that you can imagine, that competing with other larger companies and so on. So this is why you need an IP strategy. You need a means, a strategy, a set of operations to help you get control of that huge chunk of value that's under the waterline. And the best time to start to do that is when the problem is relatively small and manageable. It can be very hard to do this when the company is already very successful, and a lot of that strategy has to be put in place at that point. So where to start with that? There's no such thing as one IP strategy. Every company needs a strategy that's tailored to their own needs. But I tend to deal with it under these 4 headings, and it's like a process. There are inputs and outputs. So the objective of this is to kind of compartmentalize the problem and to give you categories of activity that you can start to manage in your own business. At the bottom, there's intellectual asset management, processes and systems that you put in place in the company. You probably already have a lot of these. There are things like how you document your R&D results, how you save data, how you secure your information, and so on. Processes and policies that you put in place in the company that ring fence the innovation that you do. Then you have intellectual assets and intellectual capital, rather, which is the resources and capability that you have in your company to deploy your innovation. Obviously, you have your expertise internally, but there are lots of other resources that you can leverage that maybe you haven't thought of, like external collaborators and strategic intelligence, things like that, that will help you to increase your innovation capability. And all of those need to be managed appropriately by the underlying, the intellectual asset management processes underpinning this. Then when you innovate, you create a lot of stuff. So a lot of different types of intangible output comes out of an innovation process. I've listed some here for examples, but it's all the sort of output from your R&D results, your contracts and agreements that you sign with collaborators and so on. Those are all very important intangible assets, and they underpin the value in the intangible value in your company. And then within that, there's a subset of core intangible assets. These are the intellectual property rights that you can get that give you a legal right to exclude competitors from operating in the market or from infringing your product and so on. It includes patents, but as you can see from this, there's a lot more to intellectual property than patents. There are lots of different forms of intellectual property rights. And these are the core intellectual assets that represent the intangible value in your company and give you an extra level of control to deploy and exploit that intangible value that you generate through research and development, innovation, and so on. So again, it can be a challenge for companies to know where to start in this, because there are a lot of different parts to it. And so as another aid to help companies in this area, I want to highlight this standard that was published just last month. It's something that we've been involved in drafting over the past number of years. And the idea of this standard is to help companies to see how their IP strategy fits in with their business strategy and the overall organization mission. And it provides guidance on different aspects of your IP management framework and things that companies can do to implement to manage the output of their innovation as intellectual property, and then to deploy that strategically with an IP strategy. So there's a link there at the bottom of that slide to information on the standard. And if anybody wants to know more about it, I can talk about that, but I won't get into it in detail here, just to mention that it does exist. So then what is Enterprise Ireland doing? So we live in the changed environment as well, just as businesses do. And so we have to look at what we're doing to support companies, innovative companies, to reap the value of their intangibles. And so the starting point for that is understanding the context of what that means. Intangibles have different sorts of economic properties to tangible assets. There's a high degree of sunkenness, for example. In other words, the person with the idea has to take the risk up front. They have to invest in improving the idea, to do the research and development, and ultimately to prove that the idea works. So somebody's got to take that risk. They're scalable. Intangible assets don't get used up by being used. There's a high degree of spillovers, both positive and negative. So an idea that's developed for the automotive industry can be applied in the medical device industry, and that's a feature of intangibles. There's also the negative side where intangible innovations can spill over into another company's products if they're not properly managed. And then synergies. Ideas work better when they're used in combination. So intangible assets and intellectual property enable synergies between companies, activities, products, technologies, and so on. So that's the context that we want to support companies. Also, in terms of Enterprise Ireland's role in developing companies, there's a cohort of companies, SMEs, that exhibit particularly high growth characteristics. And these contribute disproportionately to the economic development of the country. So these are an important cohort, and they exhibit certain characteristics. They're innovative and risk-taking. They tend to be internationally active or exporting. They have stretched resources, typically, and that's often exacerbated by the fact that they're high growth. And they're based on human capital, research and development, and intangible assets like IP. So these are a very important subset of companies that we want to support. The research data also shows that companies that protect their IP at an early stage have a much higher likelihood of achieving high growth in the future. There's a lot on this slide I appreciate, but I want to just focus on the bottom pane there that shows where companies have a broadly based IP strategy, including a lot of different forms of intellectual property. They have an even greater likelihood of achieving growth in the future. So there are good reasons for us as an enterprise agency to support companies to manage that intellectual property and intangible value. So how we do it primarily is through the relatively new IP strategy offer. So as you probably know, we support companies to do research and development as part and build that into the growth plan of the company. The IP strategy offer is a grant scheme that comes in under that. It helps companies to develop an IP strategy around their R&D activities and to build that IP strategy into the growth plan of the business through their innovation strategy. We have two main objectives. The first one is to support companies to access the external IP expertise that they need to develop their IP strategy, but also to develop the internal IP awareness and capability so that companies are in a much better position to take more control of their IP and actually reduce the reliance on what tends to be expensive external expertise. So my slides have got stuck for some reason. Okay. So This is my final slide. You'd be happy to hear. This is a brief overview of the Enterprise Ireland IP strategy offer. You can see on the left-hand side that we're seeking to support Irish SME companies that are R&D active, that have need for IP support, and that are exporting. There are two grant schemes. There's a small one, which is there to help companies get a foothold with the small amount of IP expertise consultancy, and a larger one that focuses on helping companies to develop a more detailed IP strategy with a combination of external IP expertise and developing the internal IP capability through an IP champion. There are some links there with more information on the scheme, and my contact details are at the bottom of the slide there. I believe you'll get these slides after the presentation. If not, feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to pass on any information. So that's all I've got to say. I have the great pleasure now of passing you over to Jenny Roper of Precisionbiotics. Jenny and I have spoken about IP for many years, and Jenny is right at the coalface. She's somebody that has done it and has all of the scars, but also the medals to prove it. So it's my great pleasure to pass over to Jenny and for Jenny to tell you a little bit of their story. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I am just sharing my screen here. Is that happening? Okay.
I think you have to go into presentation mode.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So hello everybody, and it's nice to be here and talking to you today. And it was interesting actually just looking at Joe's presentation there, which I hadn't seen prior to the meeting. I think we have actually lived a lot of what he has just talked about there. And I know actually if I was looking at it from a perspective of not without the experience, it looks sort of complex. That complexity is necessary because it is in some ways complex, but actually when you get into doing it, it can be sort of relatively straightforward. You take an idea, you run with it, and you end up building an IP strategy which is based really on your needs as well at the time. So this is a sort of a view from the front lines. This is a view of what Precisionbiotics has had to do over the last 20 odd years, from the point at which it was a spin out from, or before it was a spin out from UCC, to the point at which it was acquired, which happened in 2020, and it was acquired by a large Danish company. Now, Joe has talked about all the varying types of IP, and I suppose we concentrate on ones that are shall we say, the ones that you can really get your hands around. So patents, trademarks and designs, and in fact, domain names now increasingly are part of that as well, and trade secrets. And all of these have quite different characteristics and are important at different stages of the business and for different types of products. So I suppose the first point is, why would you consider investing really in intellectual property? Right across the board, from whether you're actually a farmer through to somebody who's developing a medical device, through to people like us who are, building bacterial strains into products, through to a financial services company. You have all of these things as part of the process. At some level, there'll be some research or some development, some prototyping, some trials that are going to happen. And that can be, the intangibles of software, including there as well. And that all leads into a potential patent opportunity. You then, of course, have, if you're in the manufacturing side of things, if it's a tangible product, you'll have manufacturing R&D. There's always problems. And for somebody like me, a problem is interesting because a problem has a solution. And that means there's another opportunity to get some proprietary information, which we can make part of our intangible asset base, either through patents or a trade secret. And trade secrets are sort of, the newest maybe guy on the block when it comes to intellectual property and people thinking about how they might manage their business. And then finally, of course, you have got all the commercial branding piece around trademarks. And all of that leads to really a couple of critical things which you can have right from the beginning of your company, which is it provides barriers to competition for the owners, for the company. It provides an investable opportunity, which is incredibly important as we try and grow and scale our businesses. And it does benefit the end user in the end of the day because of that investment, which leads hopefully to better products. This is my version, I suppose, of what a long-term intellectual property strategy looks like. Joe has given all the bits and pieces and all the technical processes that you need. In my head, really an IP strategy lives or dies on the interactions between the people in the business. So I would be over in this corner. I'm the sorry, I gotta get stuff. I'm the IP resource. My background is science. I had an interest in commerce. I liked the legal, so I ended up being the IP person within our company. And really, it is your business there to drive the strategy, but a lot of that is about lowering that barrier for other people in the company to think about innovation, making sure that you can either access the training or provide training for both the research and development people and for your commercial people, and get them to continually think about IP and intangible assets as part of their daily lives, and provide the legal awareness to make sure that that works. And of course, now we have so many databases that you can access, even as a small company. They're not very expensive, where you can get the sort of information that used to take large companies large units of people. So sort of databases like PatSnap, and there are a whole variety of them where you can access both commercial information about companies and the patenting trends. Really helps to give you a sort of a view out into the external world. You are talking to the research and development people, and they need to have an innovation mindset. The number of times that I have talked to people, say from very large organizations, who are researchers but who never really think properly about patenting, who don't understand maybe that you can have anything which is a problem which has a solution is interesting, and really just that communication through the group is critical. And of course, the interaction between R&D and commercial, looking at creative input into what are the trends, what are we looking at. You really need to get a virtuous circle around this for research, development, commercial, IP, and then the external advice of those people that will help you on the technical side, on the legal side. And it's key also, they're expensive, so you have to look for the right people. But all of that builds into building this portfolio. Okay, so if I can, I'm stuck, am I? I'm trying to go the next one on. Why is that not working? Okay, my screen seems to have frozen. I'm going to stop sharing my webcam just in case. That's me.
So Jenny, we can still see that that slide, the C-suite slide. If you want to try.
I know I can't actually push on with it.
Okay.
No.
Jenny, do stop sharing your slides altogether and we'll try and reboot.
Okay. Fine. So I stop sharing my slides by stop screen sharing. Okay. Shall I try again?
Yes, please.
So show screen.
And we're seeing the
Okay.
C-suite one again.
Okay,
Jenny.
got it. It's rebooted. Okay. So the next few slides are a case study, I suppose, in what happened with Precisionbiotics. If we go right back to the beginning, Precisionbiotics was built on academic research that came out of UCC in 1989. And I suppose a critical part of the IP strategy was instigated very early on, which was the technology transfer group came on board and they started to manage the confidentiality of the data and how the academics were interacting with the outside world. That is critical. 10 years of work, essentially, and an awful lot of effort, time and money led to a key patent being submitted and a company spun out around that IP in 1999. And then another, significant amount of work, and you're talking then, we're getting into millions of euros worth of clinical trial costings with a large partner, led to a series of clinical trials which were very successful, and that partner, which was P&G at the time, decided to initiate commercialization of the product. So we'd gotten from 1989 to 2005 on the back of a strong patent position and partner interest. The reason I'm showing this is that it's to show how critical that early stage is in terms of managing your confidentiality and your legal arrangements, because when the company was fundraising in 2003, there was a potential patent busting paper which was found to be published in 1997. And obviously this would have been a disaster. We got expert opinion and they decided that because of the legal trail, it would be okay, and the fundraising was successful. By 2006, we had acknowledgement that we were going to get a patent, and P&G gave a full commitment to launch. And then a month later, the US Patent Office decided they were going to reject it. And it was all on the basis of this one tiny little statement here, 35624, in a table, in a paper. Now, it did require a lot of work, effort, and expert opinion and oral hearings and everything else, but we actually managed to get that patent allowed in 2006. And that was all because the patent trail had been maintained over the period. So I suppose that's always, if you're going to have an intangible asset and look at patents, you have to understand the legal ramifications that you need to put in place very early on. That was brilliant. We went off, and at this stage we were a business-to-business company, so we were all about patenting and in-licensing. And P&G launched in 2007, and by 2012, they had a product in North America, which was a premium product there, and #1 for gastrointestinal disorders. But we were running out of time because the patent was going to end in 8 years, and they hadn't launched anywhere else. And we had done an awful lot of data and research, built up a sort of a patent portfolio, but it was all around these strains. So we had a good look and we pivoted to create a different sort of a business, a customer facing business, which created, and that pivot, as a business, we knew nothing about consumers, we knew nothing about branding really. We didn't have this sort of supply chain. By February 2014, we had launched in Ireland with Alflorex, which was our own brand and I suppose our own vision for this. So what that did from an intangible asset perspective was it completely expanded our portfolio, and it allowed us now to have a value beyond the life of the patent portfolio. It built on it, but it added to it in great depth really. So what we have done since is that we have worked to, I suppose, understand the needs of a commercial world in terms of trademarking, and we've built up a whole set now of trademarks which are linked to our products, which come under an umbrella. Sort of, we have the Precisionbiotics range, of which our premium and first product is Alpharex, and that contains the unique 35624 strain. And all of those trademarks then the company and the commercial and marketing team and the research team have been educated as to how you should use those trademarks, when you should use them, when is it important, because of course the value is in using it correctly to build up your ownership in that brand. Unlike patents where the ownership is agreed by an external party, you really, once it's registered, you really have to follow the rules to build the brand. But that once you have the correct input and you have that sort of virtual circle of communication going, that can really work. So what we do now is that we work with distributors in multiple territories, and we have built our own brand, or we have co-branded with distributors. And in 2019, we had launched in the Nordics, we'd launched in Europe, we'd launched in Morocco and Russia, and we had a strong business going as well in South America. And we were continuing to build on our patenting opportunities with other strains, which led to the launch of a second product, Zenflor, which contains a different bacterial strain. This time round, of course, we're starting the patenting and the trademarking journey together. So now we have the opportunity of unique ownership of the strain and a lot of time to build a very strong brand behind it. All of that value culminated in the acquisition of Precisionbiotics in 2020. And this was despite the fact that our key patent, which underpinned Align and Alpha-X, finished in January 2020. Its lifespan of 20 years had ended, and we were no longer just a patent based company. Now we had these products, and it is actually the mix of both patent and trademarks, and also underlying, you know, manufacturing processes and domain names and all of those sort of things, built the value that interested Novozymes in the company and led to our acquisition. And those brands are now continuing. So the Precisionbiotics range will continue, and we continue to push into China and into the Middle East. And the hope is to become a global brand in the future, underpinned then by a continuing suite of use patents for the different strains. So I suppose my key takeaway is that an IP strategy, it really hangs off the communication between different parts of the business and making it almost like it's something that you just breathe every day. And nobody gets to say, I don't know about IP. You really have to manage the chain of ownership of material and ideas through the company and externally. And you have to create that culture of innovation within your within your organization. And I suppose that the last thing was, and maybe this is maybe more particular to our situation, we had to go from recognizing one form of IP particularly to realizing the value in multiple forms of IP within the organization. Thank you. Oh, that's my final slide, by the way. Forgot to tell you. There you go.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you, Joe. Really great overview of, you know, where someone might start, or the importance of an IP strategy, and how it actually works in the real world, and how one might go about putting one in place. So thank you for both of those great presentations. We're going to open out to the floor now and take questions from people in the audience. So once again, I have a couple there. If people have a question, there's a questions panel in the box on your screen. Please feel free to pop something up there, and we'll put it to our speakers. So just in terms of getting the ball rolling here, I'd love maybe to go to you, Joe, initially, and ask the question around if an SME or a startup in particular haven't done anything in relation to their IP, haven't looked at managing their IP, don't know much about it. what do you think might be their best first step? And then I might bring Jenny in if you have anything to add on that, where your first step might have been in your journey. But Joe, to you first, if you had any sort of advice as to where to start, if it all just seems a little bit much.
Yeah, and I appreciate it can seem like a daunting task, especially when you see the number of years that Jenny has been working on this. But you know, like the old saying is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So there's always something you can do to start. And I think, you know, like I said, that there's no one IP strategy. So what a company needs to do is try to figure out what the main pinch points for them are and what the main opportunities are right now. And a good way to do that, or to start the process, is maybe to have an IP audit. So that's where you get somebody that's an expert, maybe a patent attorney, maybe an IP strategist, maybe somebody that's had experience in the industry and knows something about IP. And for them to come into your company and to look at your activity, your business, your R&D, your products, your technologies, through an IP lens, and help you to identify what the main priorities are for you at this point in time, and then for you to go ahead and to undertake addressing some of those priorities. You may find that you have more than you thought you have, and that's always a good thing. It's just a case of kind of putting an IP label on them, and then to pick off a couple of things that you can do, bite-sized pieces, and you build this up over a period of time. So I think an IP audit is a great place to start. And there's a grant for that, by the way.
Good to know.
Yes.
Yeah, Jenny.
I would agree with Joe in terms of if there's if you've not clarify what. Sorry. Hello?
Sorry, Jenny, we lost you there. We seem to have some, yeah, we can now, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So what I was saying is I would agree with Joe in terms of if you don't know where to start, getting somebody in who really does know their way around the terms and the landscape, and being able to sort of guide you as to what bits might be particularly interesting is very important. You know, we had the benefit, and we were lucky to have the benefit of, say, a small patent attorney firm who were focused on SMEs, and to whom I could pick the phone up and have a conversation when I was, you know, when I didn't understand something around the patent side of the business. And when I looked to go into trademarking, I looked for something similar again. I looked for somebody, you know, who was going to take the time to actually collaborate with me to build a portfolio. And I mean, I suppose if you think of where we went from knowing zero, for instance, around trademarks and the consumer piece, to having a very comprehensive trademark portfolio within 3 to 4 years. And that was really just about just starting. You know, once you have a strategic focus, once you have that direction to say, right, we need to do this is our end goal, then you can sort of fill in the missing bits with experts, and even online as you require. Great.
Yeah, super. Okay, thanks for that. So the questions are coming in fast and furious now, as is often the way. And I guess just kind of to come on from that question, and you mentioned there, Jenny, just you know, that, you know, tapping into sort of expertise that might be available to companies to find out more about, if there are companies out there looking to find out more about you know, intellectual property in general, or indeed the supports available in general. So obviously, Joe, we've talked a little bit about Enterprise Ireland supports, but, you know, where might a company go if they're looking for further resources or information or indeed support in particular aspects of their intellectual property? Would you have any advice? Maybe I'll go back to you, Joe, first, and Jenny, you might come in then, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to inform yourself as much as possible, and there are some very good resources out there, online resources. There's the EU IPR Help Desk, which is an EU-funded free resource for companies for targeting EU SMEs. And it's got a huge volume of information, fact sheets around different aspects of intellectual property. They run webinars and seminars and so on. If anyone wants information on that, feel free to contact me. It's a really good resource for raising your internal awareness and for getting information that you can share with the rest of your management team and researchers and so on. The patent offices also do great stuff. The European Patent Office does a lot of research in the area. They also do webinars and conferences and seminars and so on. I think those things are also always very useful. The World Intellectual Property Organization as well. And there are different courses and webinars like this every so often. So I think making that as part of your employee training program, making IP part of it, I think is a good idea, and finding those resources to help you to do that, I think will pay dividends, because you need to have some understanding of what you're doing here. You don't need to be a patent attorney, but you do need to understand some of the detail to be able to do the sort of things that Jenny has done for her business, for example.
Great,
yeah.
Thanks. Jenny, would you have any advice in that regard?
I think, well, Joe has covered off, like, I think the places to start, absolutely. And I suppose as part of our induction process now, for every single person that comes into the company, whatever their rank or role, IP is part of their induction process. So again, it's almost, it has to become something that you breathe through the company, and you don't have to be the expert to start this off. It really is a case of really giving somebody who has an interest in it the responsibility to learn about it, because there's lots out there that they can learn. And then a lot of the doors are open now, for instance through Joe, etc., and other places. When you need to ask the question, or when you say I need extra help, it is there. It's really just a question of starting.
If I could jump in there again as well, Elizabeth, just to say that the Knowledge Transfer Ireland website is an excellent resource. There are, and I'm not just buttering you up there, there are really good guides, there are good models for agreements and so on. The sort of processes that you need to put in place in your business to capture your IP. There are some models, some great models on the KTI website to help do that as well. And the other thing about IP, one of the problems with IP is that it tends to arise as a problem when you're not watching it as you go along. And there's kind of an 80-20 thing. 80% of the work that you need to do around your IP is stuff that you need to do in-house yourself. And then the final 20% is where you need to bring in those experts to do it. That's if you're doing it correctly. What we end up doing is IP pops up as a problem, and we spend 100% of our time working with external experts trying to fix the problem. So we want to try and change that by taking more control in-house, and that's why some internal awareness and capability is important.
Great. Okay, well look, we have a lot of questions here, and we're not going to get through all of them, and I'm conscious of time. So what I'm going to suggest is that we will take the questions that have come in and maybe put together some frequently asked questions. So we'll link in with yourself, Jenny and Joe, just on some of the questions coming through, and we'll circulate some detail and answers to those questions to the audience as part of the follow-up, if that's okay with with you both. As a sort of a wrap up, if there was one sort of key message, I'm going to come to Joe second on this. So if there's one sort of thing that you could share, Jenny, with the audience in terms of, you know, what's been your biggest learning in the process, or, you know, is there anything that you might have done differently if you were to go back in time that you might share with the audience? So the one biggie that you've learned in coming through, it would be great if you could share that. And similarly, Joe, if you can have a little think about what your sort of your go home message is for everybody on the session today.
My biggest learning through the 20-year process would have been to increase the awareness of my R&D team of some of the underlying processes and around building, say, patents in the first instance, and then with the commercial team, we did this with trademarks. We initiated the communication early on. It's kind of echoing Joe's point, but I think it can't be said enough. It's just that having that internal knowledge breaks down the barriers to innovation, and it makes sure that that innovation process is much smoother. Again, you know, highlighted by the original legal trail that we needed, and we had to do that 10 years before the problem arose. IP is something that will come back and bite you in the bum unless you actually try and follow it through consistently from an early point, from an early stage.
Super. Okay. Thanks, Jenny. And Joe, have you got one final word?
Yeah, I guess the same point is coming to my mind. I think that's the critical thing. Start now, because the value will come to you down the road. Maybe that's a hard sell to your financial controller and so on, but you know, it's either that or find problems further down the road. So I suppose, speaking specifically to business people on this webinar, if you're the CEO, I'd say talk to your people about, you know, what you can do to develop your IP strategy, where to start. If you're not the CEO or you're an R&D engineer or so on in the company, you need to talk to your CEO, and you need to start to develop how this is going to become part of the culture of the business, because it is just simply the reality of doing business today. It's IP is there. You may love it, you may hate it, but you just can't ignore it.
Great. So never too soon to start. Prepare, and loads of resources and information and support out there for anybody looking to access them. I think is what I'm hearing from both of you guys this morning. So look, all that remains with me is to say thank you very much to both of you for your time this morning. Thank you to everybody for joining us on the webinar. As I say, we will be in touch with all of you. We'll be circulating a recording of this morning's session, and we'll package up some of the questions that have come through with some answers from our expert speakers and circulate them as well. And you will be receiving some feedback request forms. We'd really greatly appreciate if you could complete those because they go a long way to informing what we talk about and making sure that our webinars are topics of interest to people as we go through the year and put our schedule together. So our next webinar will be on the 2nd of February, and we're going to be looking at the topic of tackling climate change through Irish research. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you there next month. And thank you very much once again to all for attending. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.